The weight of time. Rosa Simmons had always been a woman of strength. At 68, her body bore the wear of a life filled with sacrifice, hard work, and quiet endurance. For decades, she had toiled in kitchens, washing dishes, scrubbing counters, and enduring long shifts for meager pay. Her hands, once soft and agile, were now calloused and stiff, a reflection of her life's work. She had never complained, even when the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. She'd learned long ago that complaining didn't solve anything. Survival was all that mattered. The clamor of the busy kitchen at Lupa Gourmet was a daily battle. The constant orders, the hurried steps of waiters, and the sharp commands from the chefs blended into an endless cacophony. Rosa had learned to tune it out. Her world, at this point, was the sink in front of her and the never-ending stack of plates. Her co-workers were far younger, and despite her age, Rosa kept pace with them. The younger ones would often glance at her with a mix of confusion and pity, but Rosa paid them no mind. She had been doing this long before they knew the difference between a pot and a pan. Rosa's employer, Mr. Vance, was a man known for his temper. He was the type of person who saw employees as tools to be used rather than humans with needs. The restaurant was his kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist. Today, like most days, Mr. Vance's eyes were fixed on Rosa. He didn't like her. That much was clear. Her slow movements, the wrinkles on her face, the age that showed through every step she took, all of it seemed to irritate him. He had often grumbled about wanting someone younger for the job, but Rosa had been there long enough to have tenure that protected her position. Rosa. Plates. Now. Chef Antoine barked from the line, pulling her from her thoughts. Her body ached as she moved to fulfill the request, loading the clean plates onto the cart with trembling hands. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her with its slow ticking. Her shift had only begun, but her legs already felt like they were giving out beneath her. There was something different about today, though. Rosa couldn't place it at first, but a gnawing feeling of unease was growing in the pit of her stomach. Her breaths were shallow, and each movement sent sharp jolts of pain through her joints. She hadn't had a proper break in hours, and exhaustion was threatening to overtake her. She looked around at the other workers. Some were taking quick water breaks, others leaning against counters for brief moments of respite. Rosa had never been one to stop in the middle of a shift, but today her body was telling her otherwise. She wiped her brow, feeling the cold sweat bead against her dark skin. The kitchen seemed to spin slightly as she reached for the counter to steady herself. "Are you okay, Rosa?" whispered Tanya, a young waitress who had taken a liking to Rosa over the past few months. "I'm fine, child," Rosa replied, forcing a tired smile. But she wasn't. She was far from fine. Mr. Vance, always watching from the shadows, caught the moment Rosa paused. His face twisted with anger as he stomped toward her. His voice boomed through the kitchen, silencing the noise around them. "Rosa, what do you think you're doing? This isn't break time." His eyes were cold, filled with disdain as he towered over her, his presence overwhelming. Rosa straightened her back, trying to summon the strength to respond. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't care about excuses. You're here to work, not to take breaks whenever you feel like it. If you can't handle the job, then maybe it's time to consider retirement." Mr. Vance's voice dripped with venom, each word cutting deeper into Rosa's pride. The room felt smaller, and all eyes were on her. She could feel the judgment from her coworkers, the silent question of whether she was still fit for this job. Rosa's heart pounded in her chest, but she bit her tongue. Years of being treated as less than had taught her to stay silent. But today, something in her broke. Without saying a word, Rosa turned her back to the sink and made her way to the break room. Her legs felt heavy, and each step was a struggle, but she kept walking, ignoring the gasps of shock from her coworkers. She had never done this before, never walked away in the middle of a shift. But something inside her had finally reached its limit. She couldn't take it anymore. Mr. Vance followed her into the break room, his voice booming with rage. You think you can just walk away. You're not special, Rosa. I've put up with your slowness long enough. But this, you're on thin ice. Take a break if you need to, but don't expect to have a job when you come back. Rosa sat down heavily in the chair, her hands trembling. She felt a tear escape her eye, but quickly wiped it away. She didn't want Mr. Vance to see her cry, didn't want him to know how much his words hurt. But she was tired, so tired. Not just physically, but emotionally. After years of giving everything to this job, she had nothing left to offer. Mr. Vance stormed out of the room, leaving Rosa alone with her thoughts. For the first time in her life, she began to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to walk away. As she sat there, staring blankly at the wall, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her vision blurred as she read the message from her son, Darius. "Hey, Ma, I got some news. Can we talk later tonight?" Rosa smiled weakly. Her son had always been her source of strength. He had grown up to be a kind, intelligent man, despite the struggles they had faced together. He was her pride and joy, the one thing that kept her going all these years. Little did Rosa know, the conversation they were about to have would change everything. The next few hours would not only test her endurance but reveal a truth that would leave Mr. Vance and the entire restaurant staff speechless. The breakthrough. The break room of Lupa Gourmet had never felt so cold and empty. Rosa sat hunched over in the small chair, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the air. Her mind raced, replaying the confrontation with Mr. Vance over and over. Each time, the words hurt a little more, cutting into her like shards of glass. She knew she wasn't as fast as the younger workers. She knew her body couldn't keep up like it used to. But after decades of hard work, surely she deserved a moment of understanding, a moment to breathe. She rubbed her hands together, feeling the familiar ache in her fingers. Arthritis had set in years ago, making the simple task of washing dishes feel like climbing a mountain. Her knuckles were swollen, and the veins in her hands stood out like ropes, a testament to years of sacrifice. Yet she never complained, not to her coworkers, not to her family, not even to her son, Darius, who had always worried about her health. As she sat in silence, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Darius. "Ma, you okay? Let me know when you can talk. It's important." She held the phone in her hands, staring at the message for a moment. She didn't want to worry him. He had his own life now, his own struggles. Rosa had raised him as a single mother, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She never wanted him to feel like a burden, even when times were tough. And now, as a grown man, Darius had his own career and responsibilities. He didn't need to be burdened with her troubles. "I'm okay, son. We can talk later tonight. Love you," she typed back, forcing herself to add a smiley face at the end. She didn't want him to know how much pain she was in, physically and emotionally. The break room door swung open suddenly, and Tanya, the young waitress who had spoken to her earlier, peeked in. "Rosa, are you all right?" Tanya's voice was soft, filled with concern. She stepped inside and sat down next to Rosa, her wide brown eyes searching the older woman's face. Rosa forced a smile, though her heart wasn't in it. "I'm fine, honey. Just needed a little rest, that's all." Tanya wasn't convinced. She had seen the way Mr. Vance had spoken to Rosa, the way his words seemed to beat her down, just as the years of work had. "That man has no right to treat you like that. You've worked harder than anyone here, Rosa. Everyone knows it." Rosa sighed, her shoulders slumping. "He's just doing his job, I guess. I've been here a long time, and I don't move as fast as I used to. I get why he's upset. But I don't know, Tanya. I'm just so tired." Tanya reached over and placed a hand on Rosa's, her touch warm and comforting. "You don't deserve to be treated like this, not after everything you've done for this place, for all of us." Rosa looked down at her hands, the familiar tears pricking the corners of her eyes again. "I don't know what else I can do. I'm too old to start over, and too proud to quit. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the years pressing down on both of them. Though for very different reasons. Tanya was young, full of hope and promise, while Rosa felt like her best years were behind her, slipping further away with each passing day. After a few moments, Tanya spoke again, her voice quiet but determined. I've heard the way Darius talks about you. He's so proud of everything you've done. You've given him everything. Maybe it's time to let him take care of you, Rosa. Rosa smiled at the mention of her son. Darius had been the light of her life, the one thing that had kept her going through the darkest of times. She had worked so hard to provide for him, to give him a better life than she had. And he had turned out to be a wonderful man, strong, caring, and successful. She was proud of him, more than words could ever express. But the thought of leaning on him, of letting him see her like this, broken and tired, was too much. Rosa had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. She didn't want to burden him with her struggles. I'll be all right, Tanya, Rosa said, her voice soft but firm. I've made it this far, haven't I? Tanya frowned but didn't push any further. She knew how proud Rosa was, how hard it was for her to ask for help. If you ever need anything, Rosa, just let me know. You don't have to go through this alone. Rosa nodded, grateful for the young woman's kindness. Thank you, sweetheart. After a few minutes, Tanya left the break room, and Rosa was alone again. The weight of everything felt heavier now, the exhaustion settling deep into her bones. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to keep going no matter how tough things got. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could keep pushing forward. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a call from Darius. "Hey, May." His voice came through, warm and familiar, immediately making her feel a bit lighter. "I've been trying to get a hold of you all day. Is everything okay?" Rosa hesitated. She didn't want to worry him, but she also didn't want to lie. "I'm fine, Darius. Just a bit tired, that's all." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Rosa could almost hear the gears turning in her son's mind. He always knew when something was wrong, even when she tried to hide it. "Ma, you don't sound fine. What's going on? Is it work?" Rosa sighed. "It's nothing, Beatty. Just a tough day. You know how it is." Darius's voice softened, but there was a note of determination in it. "Ma, you don't have to keep doing this. You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve a break. You deserve to rest." Rosa closed her eyes, feeling the tears threatening to spill over again. She had always been so strong for him, always made sure he had everything he needed. The idea of letting him take care of her, of showing him how much she was struggling, felt like failure. "I'm not ready to stop yet, Darius. I've still got a few more years left in me," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. There was another pause, and then Darius spoke again, his voice full of emotion. "Ma, I've been wanting to tell you something. Something big. But I didn't want to stress you out. Can we talk about it tonight? I think it's time you knew." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. Darius sounded serious, more serious than she had heard him in a long time. "Of course, baby. We'll talk tonight." As she hung up the phone, Rosa felt a strange mix of emotions: worry, anticipation, and a flicker of hope. What could Darius be keeping from her? And how would it change everything? Little did she know, the truth Darius was about to reveal would shake the very foundations of her life and leave everyone, including Mr. Vance, in stunned silence. Secrets unveiled. The hours crept by slowly after Rosa's conversation with Darius. Every clang of a pot and every barked order from the kitchen felt distant, as if the world around her was moving in slow motion. Rosa had returned to her station after her brief break, determined to finish her shift despite the aching in her bones. But her mind wasn't on the dishes or the orders. It was on Darius and the cryptic tone in his voice. What could he possibly need to tell her that was so important? Rosa had always been proud of how close she and Darius were. Raising him on her own hadn't been easy, but they had formed a bond stronger than most. He had never been the type to keep secrets, especially not from her. Even as a child, he had been an open book, sharing his thoughts, worries, and dreams with her. That was why his hesitation earlier had rattled her. What could be so serious that her own son didn't want to say it right away? The kitchen staff moved around her in a blur as Rosa scrubbed at the never-ending pile of dishes. The weight of her exhaustion seemed heavier now, dragging her down with each passing minute. She knew she couldn't keep up with this pace much longer, no matter how much pride she had in her work. But what would she do if she stopped? Her entire life had been built around working, providing for her family, and surviving. What was left when all of that was taken away? Rosa, I need more clean pots over here. Chef Antoine's voice sliced through her thoughts, pulling her back to the chaotic reality of the kitchen. She nodded silently, her hands working mechanically as she scrubbed at the stubborn grease stains. Her heart wasn't in it, though. Not today. Today, her mind was somewhere else, on her son, and on the unknown truth he was about to reveal. That evening, as Rosa made her way home, her body felt heavier than usual. The familiar route seemed longer, each step more labored than the last. Her small apartment was only a few blocks away from Lupa Gourmet, but tonight, the distance felt insurmountable. She clutched her purse tightly, her fingers trembling slightly, not from the cold but from the weight of her thoughts. When she finally reached her building, Rosa paused at the entrance. The worn brick facade of the apartment complex had been her home for nearly a decade, ever since Darius had moved out to pursue his career. It wasn't much, but it was hers, a place of comfort, despite its peeling paint and creaky floors. She pushed open the heavy door and made her way to her apartment on the third floor, each step up the narrow stairwell feeling like a small victory. As she opened the door to her apartment, she was greeted by the familiar scent of lavender, her favorite air freshener, something that always made her feel at ease. But tonight, even the comforting smell couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She sat down on the worn couch in her small living room, her hands resting on her lap as she stared at the phone on the coffee table. The conversation with Darius lingered in her mind, each word replaying like a broken record. What could be so important? Before she could dwell on it any longer, the phone buzzed, lighting up with Darius's name. She took a deep breath and answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Hey, baby. Hey, Ma. Are you home? Darius's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Rosa couldn't ignore. Yes, I just got home. What's going on, Darius? You've got me worried. There was a brief pause on the other end, and Rosa could hear Darius sigh. I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't mean to worry you. I wanted to tell you in person, but I couldn't wait any longer. Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. Tell me what? You're scaring me, Darius. Ma, do you remember when I told you I got that promotion a few months ago? Rosa nodded, though he couldn't see her. Of course, baby. You told me you were moving up in the company. I was so proud of you. Well, there's more to it than that, Darius began, his voice hesitant. You see, I didn't just get a promotion. I got offered a position at the executive level. Rosa blinked, momentarily stunned. Executive? Darius, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to overwhelm you, Ma, he said, his voice soft. I know you've been stressed with work and everything. But there's more. I'm not just an executive. I'm the new COO, Chief Operating Officer, of one of the biggest restaurant chains in the country. Rosa's heart stopped. COO. How had her son risen to such heights without her knowing? She had always known Darius was brilliant, ambitious, and hardworking. But this was something else entirely. But Darius, Rosa stammered. How? When did all of this happen? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, Darius replied, his tone modest, though Rosa could sense the pride in his voice. I wanted to make sure I could handle it before I told you. But now that I've settled into the role, I think it's time you knew. And, there's more. Rosa was already reeling from the news, but the seriousness in Darius's voice told her there was something bigger coming. The restaurant I'm COO of, it's Lupa Gourmet's parent company. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. Wait, what? Ma, the restaurant you've been working at for years, it's part of the company I help run. I didn't realize it until a few weeks ago when I was going over the company's assets. When I saw the name of your restaurant on the list, I couldn't believe it. Rosa was speechless. The very place where she had spent years scrubbing dishes, working her fingers to the bone, was under the control of the company her son now helped run. How was that even possible? I didn't want to tell you like this, Darius continued, but I couldn't stand the thought of you working there any longer. You don't deserve to be treated the way you've been treated, Ma. I've heard the stories about how Mr. Vance talks to you. It's not right. Tears welled up in Rosa's eyes. She had always been so proud of Darius, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her son, the boy she had raised on her own, was now in a position of power so high that he could change her life with a single phone call. Darius, I don't know what to say, Rosa whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You've done so much. I had no idea. You've done everything for me, Ma, Darius said, his voice full of love. Now it's my turn to take care of you. I've already spoken with the higher-ups, and we're making some changes at Lupa Gourmet, starting with Mr. Vance. Rosa's heart raced. Changes? What do you mean? Let's just say he won't be in charge much longer, Darius said, his voice firm. And Ma, you don't have to worry about working there anymore. I want you to retire. You've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to rest. Rosa's tears flowed freely now, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone. The weight of her years of hard work, the sacrifices, the struggles, it all seemed to fall away in that moment. Her son, the boy she had raised with love and determination, had become the man who would now take care of her. Darius, I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, Ma, Darius said softly. I wouldn't be where I am without you. As Rosa sat in her small apartment, the reality of her son's success washing over her, she realized something. The strength and resilience she had passed on to Darius had come full circle. He had grown into a man who not only honored her sacrifices, but was ready to ensure her remaining years were filled with comfort and peace. And tomorrow, when Mr. Vance walked into Lupa Gourmet, he would have no idea just how much his world was about to change. A new dawn. The next morning, Rosa woke up with a sense of unease mixed with curiosity. Darius's revelation from the night before was still fresh in her mind, and the reality of it all was beginning to sink in. She hadn't slept much, her thoughts swirling in a storm of disbelief, pride, and a strange new feeling she hadn't allowed herself to entertain before. Hope. For years, Rosa had accepted her life as it was. Her place in the world was that of a hard-working woman, invisible to those in power, unappreciated, but reliable. She had never asked for more, never expected more. Now suddenly, the world as she knew it was shifting. The idea of not working, of no longer struggling to make ends meet, felt foreign. Could she really stop? Could she really let go of the only life she had known? The thought of Mr. Vance, the head chef, crossed her mind. For years, he had ruled over the kitchen like a tyrant, barking orders, showing no respect for those beneath him. Rosa had grown accustomed to his condescending tone and dismissive attitude. But now, with Darius's new role, things were about to change. She wondered how Mr. Vance would react when he realized who her son was and what kind of power he wielded. Rosa stood up slowly, her body creaking with age and wear. The thought of facing another grueling day in the kitchen weighed heavily on her, but she couldn't just stop. Not yet. She needed to see this through, to see how the changes Darius had promised would unfold. At Lupa Gourmet, The usual morning chaos was in full swing when Rosa arrived. The familiar clanging of pots and the sizzling of oil greeted her as she walked through the kitchen doors. As always, no one paid her much attention. The staff bustled about, preparing for the lunch rush, and Mr. Vance's voice rang out from the back of the kitchen. "Rosa, you're late," Mr. Vance barked, his voice dripping with disdain as he stormed over. "I don't care how old you are. You need to be here on time if you want to keep this job." Rosa swallowed hard, her heart racing as she met his gaze. There was a time when his words would have cut her deeply, but today was different. Today, she wasn't the same powerless dishwasher. She was the mother of a man who had the power to change everything. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance," Rosa said softly, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She didn't need to say more. She knew that soon, everything would be different. Mr. Vance sneered at her, shaking his head. "You better be sorry. You're on thin ice, Rosa. Get to work." Rosa nodded, turning to head to the dishwashing station. But before she could take more than a few steps, the door to the kitchen swung open, and in walked a man she hadn't expected to see today or ever. Darius. He looked out of place in the chaotic kitchen, his sharp suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the grease-stained aprons and worn-out shoes of the staff. His presence commanded attention, and the kitchen fell into an eerie silence as everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at the newcomer. Mr. Vance's eyes narrowed as he approached Darius, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone laced with impatience. He clearly didn't recognize Darius or understand the gravity of the situation. Darius didn't immediately respond. Instead, his eyes scanned the kitchen, landing briefly on Rosa before returning to Mr. Vance. There was a quiet confidence about him, an air of authority that couldn't be ignored. "My name is Darius Green," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I'm the chief operating officer of the company that owns this restaurant." The color drained from Mr. Vance's face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his usual arrogance evaporating in an instant. The kitchen staff exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was about to happen. "I'm here to discuss some changes," Darius continued, his eyes locking onto Mr. Vance's, "starting with how you treat your employees." Rosa felt her heart swell with pride as she watched her son take control of the situation. She had always known Darius was a leader, but seeing him in action like this, defending her and standing up to a man who had made her life so difficult for so long, was something she could never have imagined. Mr. Vance's bravado faltered as he stammered, I don't understand. What changes?" Darius's expression remained steady. "I've heard about how you've treated my mother, and I'm not pleased. Lupa Gourmet prides itself on being a place of respect and dignity for all employees, no matter their role. That's not what I've seen here." The kitchen was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Rosa watched as Mr. Vance's face turned a deep shade of red, his eyes flicking nervously between Darius and the kitchen staff. "Your mother?" Mr. Vance asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Darius said, his voice growing firmer. "Rosa Green is my mother. And after today, she won't be working for you anymore." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She had known this was coming, but hearing it said aloud in front of everyone made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. She wasn't going to have to work here anymore. She was finally going to be free. I didn't know," Mr. Vance sputtered, clearly scrambling for a way to save face. "If I'd known." "It shouldn't matter who she is," Darius interrupted, his voice cold. "Every employee deserves to be treated with respect, whether they're washing dishes or running the kitchen. That's what's going to change around here." Rosa's breath caught in her throat as she watched Mr. Vance squirm under her son's scrutiny. She had never seen Mr. Vance look so small, so powerless. It was a complete reversal of their usual dynamic, and Rosa couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. "And as for you," Darius continued, his eyes narrowing, "I've already spoken with the board, and they agree. You're no longer fit to lead this kitchen. Effective immediately, you're being replaced." The shock on Mr. Vance's face was palpable. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked as though he had been punched in the gut, and for the first time since Rosa had known him, he had no snappy comeback, no cruel remark. He was defeated. You can't do this," Mr. Vance finally managed to choke out. "I've been here for years." "And that's exactly the problem," Darius said, his voice unyielding. "You've been here too long, and you've lost sight of what's important. Your behavior toward my mother and others has been unacceptable, and it's time for a change." With that, Darius turned away from Mr. Vance, his gaze softening as it landed on Rosa. He walked over to her, the tension in the room easing as he approached. "Ma," he said gently, his voice full of love and pride. "You don't have to work here anymore. I've got everything taken care of. You can retire, relax, and enjoy life the way you deserve." Tears welled up in Rosa's eyes as she looked at her son. She had spent so many years working, struggling, and sacrificing, and now, because of Darius, she finally had the chance to rest. It was a gift she never thought she would receive, and the gratitude she felt was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, baby." Darius smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. "No, Ma. Thank you. For everything." As they stood there in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by stunned staff and a defeated Mr. Vance, Rosa realized something profound. Her story wasn't just one of hard work and sacrifice. It was a story of resilience, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. She had given Darius everything she had, and now he was giving it all back to her. And for the first time in her life, Rosa allowed herself to truly believe that she deserved it. A future reimagined. The ride home from the restaurant was quiet but filled with an unspoken understanding between Rosa and Darius. For Rosa, this moment was surreal. Her entire world had been defined by the daily grind, waking up at dawn, working her hands raw in the restaurant, and coming home to aching bones and exhaustion. The idea of not doing that anymore felt foreign, even terrifying. She stared out of the window of Darius's sleek black sedan, her thoughts racing as the city blurred by. Darius, on the other hand, kept glancing at his mother, trying to gauge her emotions. He had always known how much she sacrificed for him, but until recently, he hadn't fully understood the depth of her struggles. Seeing her in that restaurant, still working herself to the bone at her age, stirred something inside him that he couldn't ignore. He needed to give her the life she deserved, a life she had earned through years of love, sacrifice, and hard work. "Ma," Darius broke the silence, his voice soft but resolute. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I've got it all covered." Rosa turned to look at her son, her heart swelling with pride and a strange new sense of uncertainty. "Darius, baby, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I've been working all my life. I don't know how to stop." She paused, her eyes glistening with emotion. "What am I supposed to do now?" Darius smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "You live, Ma. You finally get to live." They arrived at Rosa's small, modest apartment, an old, weathered building that had been her home for over 2 decades. The stairs creaked underfoot as they climbed to the 3rd floor, and the paint on the walls was peeling, a testament to the years that had passed. Rosa had made the apartment a home, filling it with warmth and memories, but it was still a far cry from the comfort she deserved. As they stepped inside, Rosa felt a wave of nostalgia. This was the place where she had raised Darius, where she had worked tirelessly to give him the best life she could. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Darius followed her inside, his eyes taking in the worn furniture, the faded photographs on the walls, and the small kitchen where Rosa had prepared countless meals for him growing up. He felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on building his own career and making a name for himself that he hadn't realized how much his mother had been holding onto, how much she had sacrificed just to keep a roof over her head. "Ma," Darius said softly, his voice tinged with emotion. "I've been thinking. You don't need to stay here anymore. I want you to move into a new place. Somewhere nice, where you can relax and not have to worry about anything." Rosa shook her head, her brow furrowed. "This is my home, Darius. I can't just leave it behind. I've lived here for so long." "I know," Darius replied gently. "But you've done enough, Ma. It's time for you to have a home that reflects everything you've given, everything you've done for me and for yourself. You deserve more than this." Rosa hesitated, her eyes scanning the room that held so many memories. It was true. She had worked hard all her life, and the idea of living in comfort was tempting, but it was also terrifying. Change had never come easily for her, and the thought of leaving behind a life she had built, even if it wasn't perfect, filled her with anxiety. "I don't know, baby," Rosa said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can just leave all of this behind. It's all I've known." Darius knelt down in front of her, looking up into her eyes with a tenderness that made Rosa's heart ache. "Ma, you're not leaving anything behind. You're taking the love, the memories, the lessons with you. You'll always have those. But now you get to live the life you deserve. You've given me everything, and now it's my turn to take care of you." Rosa felt a lump form in her throat as she looked into her son's eyes. She had always known Darius was special, that he had the heart and drive to make something of himself, but seeing the man he had become, strong, compassionate, successful, was overwhelming. She had raised him to be this way, and now he was giving back in a way she had never expected. "But what will I do with myself?" Rosa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I've spent my whole life working, taking care of things. How do I just stop?" Darius smiled, standing up and gently pulling her to her feet. "You're not going to stop, Ma. You're just going to start living for yourself. There are so many things you've never had the time or the means to do. Now you can travel, relax, take up a hobby, or spend more time with your friends. You can do whatever makes you happy." Rosa let out a shaky breath, her mind racing with possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Travel? Hobbies? The thought of doing things just for the sake of enjoyment seemed almost frivolous to her, but deep down, there was a part of her that yearned for it. She had always put others first. Darius, her late husband, the people she worked for. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to put herself first. Darius continued, his voice full of excitement. "And Ma, I've already made arrangements. There's a beautiful house waiting for you, in a nice neighborhood. It's quiet, peaceful, and it has a garden. You've always wanted a garden, right?" Rosa blinked in surprise. A garden. It had been a dream of hers for as long as she could remember, but one she had long since buried under the weight of her responsibilities. She had always loved the idea of tending to flowers, watching them grow and bloom, but she had never had the time or the space for it. You got me a house with a garden?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I did, and it's all yours, Ma. You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." Rosa felt tears well up in her eyes. This was too much, more than she had ever dreamed of. She had always wanted to provide a better life for Darius, but now here he was, giving her a life she had never thought possible. It was overwhelming, and the emotions threatened to spill over as she stood there, trying to process it all. "I don't know what to say," Rosa whispered, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I never expected. I never thought." "You don't have to say anything," Darius said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Just know that you deserve this, Ma. You've given so much, and now it's time for you to receive." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, as Rosa allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve working until she couldn't anymore. A future where she could finally rest, finally enjoy the fruits of her labor. It was a future she had never dared to dream of, but now it was within reach. A few days later, Rosa stood in front of her new home. A charming, cozy house with a small front yard, and, as Darius had promised, a beautiful garden in the back. The house was nothing grand or ostentatious, but it was perfect. It was a place where Rosa could find peace, where she could wake up every morning without the weight of the world on her shoulders. As she walked through the front door, the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air. The furniture was simple but comfortable, and the large windows let in an abundance of natural light. It was the kind of home Rosa had always dreamed of, but never thought she would have. Darius had made sure everything was in place, from the flowers in the garden to the fully stocked kitchen. He had thought of everything, down to the smallest details, and it was clear that this house was a labor of love, a gift from a son to his mother. Rosa walked through the house, running her fingers along the smooth surfaces of the countertops, the soft fabric of the couches. This was hers. After all these years, this was her home. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As she stepped out into the garden, the sun shining down on her, Rosa smiled. It was a new dawn, a new chapter, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to live it fully. The unfolding of legacy. Rosa sat in her new garden, her hands gently caressing the soft petals of the blooming roses. The sun was warm against her skin, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, there wasn't a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She wasn't worrying about rent, bills, or whether her body could handle another grueling shift at the restaurant. She had time now, time to breathe, time to reflect, and time to live. But despite this newfound peace, there was still an adjustment period. Rosa's entire identity had been shaped by decades of hard work and sacrifice. She had spent her life ensuring that Darius could succeed and thrive. And now, with the weight of those burdens lifted, she found herself wondering, who was Rosa when she wasn't struggling? She didn't have to ponder that question alone. Darius had been visiting frequently, checking in on her, sharing meals, and spending time helping her settle into this new chapter of her life. But today was special. Today, Darius had arranged a small gathering at the new house. Family, old friends, people Rosa hadn't seen in years, and even some of her coworkers from the restaurant. The thought of it had made Rosa nervous at first, but she realized that it was time to reconnect with the people she had unintentionally drifted away from while working nonstop. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, the doorbell rang, signaling the start of the celebration. Rosa opened the door to see her younger sister, Grace, standing there with a wide smile on her face. Behind her were cousins, nieces, and a few friends who had all come to celebrate Rosa's newfound freedom. "Oh, Rosa, look at this place," Grace exclaimed, stepping inside and marveling at the cozy, inviting atmosphere. "I can't believe this is your home. You deserve every bit of it." Rosa hugged her sister tightly, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. "It's still a bit unreal to me, Grace. I never thought I'd see the day when I could live like this." Grace pulled back, studying her sister with warmth and affection. "You've worked harder than anyone I know, Rosa. This is your reward. And now, it's time for you to enjoy it." As more guests arrived, the house was soon filled with laughter and conversation. Rosa found herself drifting through the rooms, smiling as she watched the people she loved interact in the space she could now call her own. She was grateful for Darius, for the man he had become, and for the life he had given her. But more than that, she was grateful that she had raised him to be the kind of person who never forgot where he came from. The party was lively, and as the evening went on, Darius took a moment to address the crowd. He stood in the living room, clearing his throat as everyone quieted down to listen. "I just want to thank you all for being here," Darius began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This house isn't just a gift to my mother. It's a testament to everything she's done for me and everyone around her. My mom sacrificed more than anyone should ever have to, and she did it with grace, dignity, and love." Rosa felt her heart swell as she listened to her son speak. She hadn't expected this kind of acknowledgement, but it warmed her deeply. "She worked so hard to make sure I had a future," Darius continued, his voice cracking slightly. She was always there, always giving, and now it's her turn to receive. She deserves this. No, she earned this. And I just want to say, Ma, thank you. Thank you for everything. Tears filled Rosa's eyes as the room erupted into applause. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the outpouring of love from those around her was almost too much to take in. But as Darius walked over to her, pulling her into a tight hug, she let the tears fall. These weren't tears of sadness or exhaustion, but tears of gratitude and fulfillment. She had done what she set out to do, raised a good man, and survived the trials of life. And now she could finally rest. In the weeks that followed the party, Rosa began to explore new aspects of herself that she had long ignored. One morning, she found herself drawn to an old box of painting supplies she had tucked away decades ago. She had always loved to paint as a young woman, but had given it up when the responsibilities of life had taken over. Now, in her sun-drenched living room, she picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years. At first, her hand was shaky, unsure. But as the days passed, Rosa found herself falling back in love with the way the paint moved across the canvas. She wasn't trying to create masterpieces, just capturing small moments of beauty, like the way the morning light filtered through her garden, or how the flowers bloomed in soft pastel shades. Painting became her meditation, a way to reconnect with herself and with the world around her. And it wasn't just painting. Darius encouraged Rosa to travel, to see the places she had always dreamed of, but had never had the time or means to visit. At first, the idea seemed daunting. Rosa had never traveled far beyond the city. But Darius, ever supportive, planned trips for them. They visited national parks, small coastal towns, and even took a trip overseas to France, where Rosa marveled at the art and culture. Each new experience added layers to her life that she had never imagined were possible. Rosa began to realize that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, growing, and embracing new opportunities, no matter what stage of life you were in. One afternoon, while Rosa was tending to her garden, Darius stopped by for a visit. He watched from the doorway as his mother carefully pruned the roses, her face serene and content. She seemed lighter now, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. "Hey, Ma," Darius called out, walking toward her with a smile. "The garden looks beautiful." Rosa straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron as she turned to greet her son. "Thank you, baby. These flowers remind me that no matter how rough life gets, there's always room for something beautiful to grow." Darius nodded, stepping closer to admire the roses. "You're the one who taught me that." They stood there for a moment, basking in the quiet peace of the garden, before Rosa spoke again. "I was thinking," she said, her voice soft but thoughtful. "I want to give back, Darius. I want to help other women like me. Women who've worked hard their whole lives, but never had a chance to really live." Darius raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Rosa continued, "I want to start something. Maybe a foundation or a support group. Something that can help women who are struggling, who need a little push to get back on their feet. I don't want anyone to go through what I did without knowing there's hope on the other side." Darius smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's a beautiful idea, Ma. And I think it's exactly what the world needs." With Darius's help, Rosa began to lay the groundwork for her new endeavor, a program designed to provide financial support, resources, and mentorship to women in the service industry who had spent their lives working tirelessly with little recognition. It was a way for Rosa to give back, to share the wisdom and strength she had gained over the years. The program quickly gained traction, and soon, Rosa found herself mentoring younger women, sharing her story of perseverance and triumph. Her life, once defined by struggle, had transformed into something far greater than she could have ever imagined. Years later, as Rosa stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new women's shelter funded by her foundation, she couldn't help but smile. The journey had been long, full of twists and turns, But she had come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and fulfilled in ways she hadn't thought possible. She looked out at the crowd, Darius by her side, the women she had helped standing proudly in the audience, and felt a deep sense of peace. Her legacy wasn't just about the hard work she had done, but about the lives she had touched, the hope she had ignited, and the strength she had passed on. Rosa had lived a life of service, but now she was living a life of purpose. And in that purpose, she had found her true self.